What's up, guys? Merry Christmas. I'm Peter Jennings, go by CSU Ram 88 across the daily fantasy industry, and really excited for an NBA Christmas slate. Of course, joined by Justin Phan, the man who powers Fantasy Labs NBA, as well as a variety of tools here at Action Labs that we're excited to show off. Justin, we're recording this on Christmas Eve. It's a fun slate. I know you're a diehard NBA fan, obviously. Fun to see a lot of these guys. I think there's a lot of really good storylines this season. And of course, we have great NBA games here on Christmas. How are you doing? And how excited are you for this slate?
Yeah, doing well. Excited for this slate of games. Should be really fun. This Pelicans Heat game just off the bat should be really exciting. Bam versus Zion Williamson should be awesome. You might get a snoozer in there potentially. We'll talk about with the Bucks and the Warriors. Warriors a little rougher than expected from the get-go, but yeah, really strong slate from us from top to finish.
Yeah, it's great. And we're going to be talking about it from a betting and DFS perspective. You can see here we're on the markets page. There's a variety of things at Action Labs that we think will be very helpful for you from a betting perspective. We're going to dive into the insiders page, which is powered by you and the Fantasy Labs NBA team. All the injuries, the bets that you already have, things you're looking at. Really excited about that product this year. I think there's going to be an immense amount of value for subscribers. So really stoked about that. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at player props as well and talking about some of this stuff from a DFS perspective with the Fantasy Labs models that you see here. So we're going to go game by game, and we're going to hit on kind of the different angles that you can take. You just mentioned the Pelicans and Heat. The big news that broke today on insiders that you mentioned, Jimmy Butler is now questionable. We have him at 65% to play. He's a Warrior. It's Christmas. 65% seems reasonable to me. The slate from a DFS perspective and betting perspective would change a lot if you were to miss.
I was honestly surprised with how much they let him go in the opener. Like, I was expecting to be on like the LeBron James plan where he was going to be closer to 30 minutes. He played 35, 36. Bam played a ton. Goran Dragic played 26 off the bench. I thought he might be in that 23 range because they have some guard depth with Kendrick Nunn and some other guys and that they can kind of ease him in. But yeah, they were going after that first win against the Magic and might have cost Jimmy a game here potentially. Traditionally, I would think that he would go. We have him at 65%, but I think there's some risk that he misses just because it's early in the season and maybe they just want to take a preventative long-term view, just given how deep they played into the playoffs and how little rest he had in the offseason. So we'll keep an eye on that. I think increases the value of Bam Adebayo as a playmaker. He was a guy I already liked as a great GPP target in the slate. Increases the value of Dragic, who should really saw a big roll off the bench in the opener and should continue to be a strong play. And then you can throw in guys like Kendrick Nunn, Tyler Hero gets more GPP consideration as well.
Yep, it's really interesting from a DFS perspective, and I want to dive into that. But first, let's talk about a bet that you've already put in. You have your bets here in Insiders. You'll get alerts if you are a subscriber to Insiders. You bet New Orleans plus 4.5. The market has already moved to 4, 3.5. You can see here on the markets page, the best price is 4. Most places are 4. 3.5 is now at MGM, Bet Online, and some other places. But you got 4.5, and you have not only that play, but I think the most interesting thing to me from a betting perspective and something to pay attention to for DFS is how this Pelicans team is playing. Last year, they played extremely fast. Now, with the new coach in Van Gundy, I expect them to play a lot slower, and that happened in the first game. And they have some capable defenders. I believe you have the under, yes, 227.5, which has moved all the way to 224.5. Part of that is maybe a little bit of the Jimmy news, but I think the market realized, they're playing better defense. And of course, you put this pick in, and a lot of people are following you for the NBA. So let's talk specifically about those bets, then we'll dive into fantasy and maybe look for some props.
Yeah, I think the Pelican stylistic shift is the biggest change we've seen in the offseason, and that's a result of Sam Van Gundy coming in, coaching two-a-days, JJ Redick, a little pissed off as a vet that he's drilling those defensive principles so tough in the early going, but it showed. I mean, they held the Raptors to 99 points in the opener, right? And we saw traces of that even in the preseason. They were 29th in pace, I believe, in the preseason, and then they were like 13th in pace that first game, 16th in defense in the preseason, and then holding the Raptors to 99 and second in defense so far through the season. So they had capable defensive pieces last season. I just don't know what Alvin Gentry was doing during practices, coaching. I just really completely ignored that end of the floor. I think a lot of coaches in the league want to say a lot of the same things. We want to play small. We want to play fast. We want to shoot a lot of threes. But to what sacrifice on the defensive end? What are you giving up, right? I think Sam Van's coming in with a more pragmatic, practical coach approach where, he's like, okay, yeah, we can score 130 points, 120 points, but if you give up more than that, then, it's all for naught. So he's, I really like the direction of this team overall. Lonzo, looks really improved as a shooter.
Shot looked amazing, especially in transition. I there's some highlights of all his shots. One in particular where he's pushing the ball and stopping pop. Form looks so good. And he's so explosive and dynamic in the open court and obviously can create for people. But if he has that shot in his repertoire, those scenarios where maybe it's a 2-on-3, he's a little bit ahead, having that in his bag really changes the dynamic. Of course, if he can knock down threes, that spaces the floor for all their other guys. And this is a team on the rise with a lot of talent, a lot of optionality going forward. I like them here. You got great value. Jimmy Butler does miss. I mean, these are incredible bets specifically, but lines have already moved in your favor, and you put these out. So ton of value here on insiders, just getting into Justin's head and, what you're looking at, as well as our NBA team in terms of the news and some coaching tendencies that we can exploit early in the season. From a DFS perspective, I think we have to consider this a multitude of ways. It's really site specific for me. We'll start with Draftkings. I think, there's a lot of really good plays in this game. I like Lonzo Ball. He got into foul trouble too. I think there's a little more minutes upside than what he showed. Eric Bledsoe, I think, is going to be right there as one of the chalkiest plays. So I want to get your opinion on him. He's going to be chalky on both sides. I think there's a pretty stable floor in terms of role and minutes, but we've seen Eric Bledsoe disappear at times. So would love to hear your kind of opinion on his, range of outcomes. And then, of course, what happens with Jimmy Butler. We're assuming he's going to play at 65%. Maybe he's a decent GPP play. But yeah, on DraftKings specifically, I like Bam a lot more. And I think Tyler Hero is another guy I want your opinion on. So let's go through some of these guys. Eric Bledsoe first. Good chalk or bad chalk?
Bad chalk for GPPs. I think he's an easy fade. He'll be heavily owned, and trusting Eric Bledsoe in these spots is kind of a recipe for disaster. I would much rather pivot to someone like Tyler Hero, who is the exact same price as Eric Bledsoe. I think that makes a ton of sense. Adebayo's popping. I was hoping he would not pop as much, just so you can get like reduced ownership, because I really like Adebayo, in the spot tomorrow. And I might have to revisit that Jimmy Butler minute projection too, because I think even if he does play, we might see Spo exercise some caution and hold him back a little bit to where he's not playing as full a minutes as a workload as he usually does. So that's something to kind of look at. I might knock off a minute after we get off this, but Adebayo I think is my favorite play, and the pivot from Bledsoe to Hero, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I like Adebayo. I think he's in cash and tournaments on DraftKings. I think Bledsoe is a clear cash game play on FanDuel. I think there's a lot of really good pivots on FanDuel. We'll pivot over there in just a second. But my final
another guy I want to mention too, Pete,
sure.
on DK as a pivot is Dragic for 300 cheaper. I think that's a great pivot too from Bledsoe.
Yep. I mean, he's been really efficient. He was playing amazing last year in the bubble before he got injured. Really was a big part of the engine for Miami getting to the finals, and unfortunately got hurt in that first game. But yeah, good upside. And I too was surprised. I mean, the Heat, obviously played most recently in the finals, and that's impactful for teams in normal years. This year, obviously, we're starting so quickly, especially for the Lakers and the Heat. after what they had to endure in the bubble getting to the championship. I thought they were going to be careful with Butler. I thought Dragic would play in those low 20s minutes too, given he's a veteran. Bam, I could see a little bit more, but I guess they just couldn't help themselves. Close game. They play those guys. I do think there's minutes upside for Tyler Hero. Obviously got a lot of attention. I think there's, outcomes here on the high end where he gets hot that he can be a GPP winning play for sure. He's the same price as Eric Bledsoe. I think with Dragic, that's a really nice pivot. And I mentioned Lonzo. I was so impressed with his shot, and just Lonzo's got real upside. I know it's a different team. He had more upside when they're playing super fast from a DFS perspective, but a guy who can still get steals. If he's knocking down threes, he can fill up the box score. I think he's kind of like a pay up to be contrarian a little bit on DraftKings and on FanDuel for that matter as well. Not that he's the most expensive guy, but he's not going to be in like the optimal lineups, but he's not like a horrible play. So I think you end up getting Lonzo at really low ownership. And you can say the same thing for Zion, honestly. But he's more expensive, and there's a lot of opportunity cost specifically on DraftKings. I'm going to go to the FanDuel prices here, but any commentary on any of those guys on FanDuel, you can see here there's more clear values. Bledsoe looks really good. Steven Adams is interesting. Brandon Ingram pops a lot more on FanDuel. What are your thoughts on Zion and then any FanDuel specific plays?
Yeah, I mean, a tougher spot for Zion going up against Adebayo, but with Zion, I love that he's off that minutes limit completely. I mean, they're going to let him go. He saw 32 in the opener. I think 32 is a reasonable expectation with some upside for more. A power forward's kind of a three-man race with Milsap, Zion, and KD as guys I'm looking at really. So Zion is definitely in the cash game mix, and you get kind of an $800 discount from KD. It's a tough slate to be paying up. To pay up that extra 800 because you want to afford guys like Giannis. So saving any kind of money that you can is super valuable. So I don't mind Zion at all. It's just a tougher power forward slate overall.
Yeah, and last comment on this game from a DFS perspective, it's the first game. All these games are on at separate times. It's the dream late swap slate. There's a ton of edge in that regard. And in general, I'm going to target game stacks and tournaments for a little bit later. But saying all that, the field's getting sharper. More and more people are talking about late swap. More people saying, hey, make sure you target the later games. So, especially if you're going to go early, I don't mind like full blown, not full blown, but if you're going to play a couple of these guys, maybe you play 4 or 5 guys. I do think it's going to play slower. There's a reason you're on the under, like you mentioned, but there's still some outcomes here where maybe you get this game stack low owned, but you do lose a lot of optionality. If I was playing like 2 or 3 teams, I certainly would want to leave optionality. This is our props page, which I think is just badass. Line shopping and with props is a really good way to kind of get into betting. The upside of props is that they're very beatable. You can see here, there's some significant edges. It's tougher to scale really big volume, but certainly, something where you can make a decent amount of money. And especially if you're just getting into it and you're not like a super hardcore, maybe a professional DFS player, but you like playing DFS, you're betting like 50 to 100 bucks or something like that on per prop. You'll have a little bit more longevity. So there's a ton of props in here that we have based on all the projections. Justin and the team go through and look through every single player and project out every single statistic, which ends up having a ton of value. So you can see here, like Zion, we have an over points bet that we think makes sense on DraftKings, showing a 9.4 edge. Brandon Ingram over assists, showing 9.3%. Phan Adebayo over on points, showing 9.2% on MGM. So really powerful stuff. Just real quickly, Justin, can you go into kind of how you do projections?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of start with our projected team totals and kind of go backwards and work from there. And just being really on top of minutes, being cognizant of playing time situations, the noisy stuff like we saw in the first game with guys like Lonzo Ball getting in foul trouble, filtering that stuff out and making sure that we're accounting for differences in coaching, rotations and substitution patterns and all that. So it's kind of an arduous process that you kind of see the results of on that props page. So if you want to go back, like a couple a couple ones that kind of generally stick out to me that are popping right now. We see that Serge Ibaka prop
Hmm.
under, and that's kind of a wrinkle in the rotation that we saw early on with Zubac playing 27 minutes in the opener to Serge Ibaka's 21, even though Serge got the start. That's really curious to me. There neither was in foul trouble either, so that's something that I bridged kind of the gap a little bit. I was expecting Serge to be the one that played 27 and not Zubac, and I kind of made that more of an even split, and I think that's not being reflected yet in the prop market. Another one is James Wiseman. I wanted to get your thoughts
Hey,
on
real quick on Zubac, I feel like he has to play more. I mean,
yeah,
we're going to talk about Jokic. I think Jokic is going to be playing a lot.
yeah,
The Nuggets clearly need a lot out of him. They don't have a ton of trust in their front court options after losing Jeremy Grant, which is just going to mean more small lineups and Jokic being out there quite a bit. So if that's the case, Ibaka is, was a great defender. He's getting older, more of a shot blocker and a stretch five now. I would imagine they want Zubac's size and, youth versus Jokic. But I do think that that's a really sharp one. You wanted to ask about Wiseman. I would come to you for all the Wiseman takes, but I mean, I saw everything that you saw. Really impressive in garbage time. I love his upside long term. In terms of game to game production, it's really interesting to me.
yeah. I was really surprised at how good he looked and how much they let him go after missing the entire preseason with COVID. I was expecting him to come in, play 14 to 18 minutes, be ramped up over the course of the season, but he came out and played 24 off the bat and looked great. And part of that is that matchup you always target net centers, but he just played great. I mean, really impressive debut. I think his minutes are pretty stabilized. And you mentioned that he played in garbage time, so
Yep.
that just elevates his floor considerably, and that's why I'm kind of on these overs for his props.
I
You know,
love that, and he's a great DFS player. I mean, we're going to talk about that game now, so it's a really nice pivot. Wiseman, I think, is a classic thing just by watching the game. Coming in, he's a freak athlete and just he's got all these physical gifts. I was impressed with his skill and the combination. I mean, it's just such a there's a reason he's a top pick. The physical gifts are going to allow him to compete in the NBA right away. But the skill, that's going to be something that might help him be more consistent. And especially from a DFS perspective, we know he's going to get minutes, and those garbage time minutes are nuts. I mean, he's out there with much worse players and not as orchestrated team defense. And, specifically on the second units, most of these bigs are not good defensively. So there's a huge added bonus there. And if we look at this game, this is a 10.5 point spread. So there's certainly a blowout risk, as we saw the Warriors get absolutely crushed by the Nets. The Nets looked awesome, but Milwaukee blew out a ton of teams last year. And if Steph doesn't have a great game, it feels like a spot where Milwaukee would blow them out. But that's why I think the line's where it's at. Steph Curry can keep people. I mean, if we get a nuclear hot Steph game, this game can be competitive. So my big takeaway, which we'll dive into with DFS, there's a ton of value here. Being contrarian, you can play the Portises of the world, or you can make some crazy plays and fade this game. But if you want to play a lot of bucks, you got to play it with Steph Curry, because the way this game stays competitive is with a ton of Steph shooting, really hot from three, and keeping this game close. I really don't see many other outcomes where the Warriors keep it close, where Steph doesn't play well. So that's what I'm looking at from a DFS perspective. When we look at the insiders page here, you were on the Bucks early at -8.5. That's moved a ton. I'm with you. I see the Bucks blowing them out a lot of the time, just because they can sell out on Steph, and they have guys to really bother Steph too. I mean, Drew Holiday, this is a great time to employ him, and they just have a lot of length. And if I'm game planning for Milwaukee, if I'm Milwaukee and game planning for the Warriors, I'm just saying, hey, let anyone else other than Steph beat us, because I just don't see the guys out there. But that's long-winded. This is your team. Talk about the bet, and then we'll dive into the DFS.
Yeah, defensively, I mean, this team is just a disaster without Draymond.
Yeah.
I mean, who guards Giannis tomorrow? I mean, if they're gonna just throw a bunch
Oubre for a stretch of time getting destroyed?
Yeah.
Wiseman's not a bad option, honestly.
Yeah, but they need someone to guard Brook Lopez, and they're comparable. They're mobile, big.
Pascal probably, I guess, will guard him a little bit.
They'll throw Pascal, Oubre, Wiggins, a couple different bodies at him just to try to slow him down, which they won't be able to. I mean, the danger here, if you're betting, is the backdoor cover. But the bench of the Warriors, especially when you take Pascal off of it, is very, very shaky. And Spurs already talking about going like 11, 12 deep. He's just grasping at straws, trying to find somebody to be a competent rotation player. We saw Juan Toscano-Anderson randomly come out and start the second half ahead of Eric Pascal in the opener. They're talking about maybe playing like Michael Mulder. This bench is just really, really bad. And you had guys like Damian Lee and Kent Bazemore. They're Steph's boys, but not really effective on the court anymore. Bazemore had a 39% three-point shooting year, which is an aberration. And he's like a 34, 35% three-point shooter otherwise. And, I think these guys, this bench is going to really struggle to make that comeback when it gets out of hand. So that's where their path is, I think, to staying competitive. And I think this second unit is really, 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 really rough. So, I probably even play it to like 9.5. I see it like 10.5 at some places too. Like this line has really been moving pretty significantly towards the Bucks' favor. And this makes it really, really interesting for DFS purposes because I think Giannis is going to be the preferred spend, overall on the Christmas slate of all the high price guys. And I think there's a lot of danger there with this game potentially getting out of hand. I know we saw heavy minutes in the opener against the Celtics. Bud kind of put those guys in to start the fourth, hoping that they might make that comeback. They did, so we rolled them the rest of the game. Giannis in particular said afterwards that he talked to Coach Bud before the season and said he wants to play more, which is a good thing. But if they're up, 15, 20 points late in the fourth quarter, there's some real minutes downside here for all these guys, for Middleton, for Giannis, for Drew. How are you approaching those guys, especially Giannis on this day? Is he still a priority spend for you, or are you kind of willing to maybe go to Luka or some other guys with your high salary slot?
Yeah, it's really fun. It's a great slate. We have stars, so it's fun to figure out who you're going to pay up for. Giannis fits a lot of the builds. And again, this is even more extreme. This is probably the most extreme in terms of the games relative to DraftKings and FanDuel value. DraftKings, there's not really that many guys who want to play in this game. It's Middleton, it's Greek. I do have a tournament play. I think Bobby Portis, who I mentioned, is a really interesting one in blowouts. This is a guy who can get white hot. And if he gets white hot in the first half specifically, creates the blowout and then plays a lot in the second half, I think this garbage time could be extremely nice from a fantasy perspective. So Bobby Portis to me is a really interesting tournament play. But yeah, on DraftKings, Middleton, I think he's fitting some lineups. I prefer Jalen Brown and maybe going cheap into the 5K range, in the shooting guard, small forward, wing areas, but he's fine. And then Giannis, he makes a lot of sense. Over on FanDuel, you're looking at a way different situation because Steph Curry is priced way down, as is Drew Holiday. They fit a lot of the optimal builds. If you run our optimizer, and this, I do have an aggregated projection here between us and ETR. It basically pops up with a lot of these, oh, sorry, I don't have all the teams. But with all the teams, you'll see here that, a lot of these teams end up with like Steph Curry and Drew Holiday, which is nice having them together, in an event that this game is competitive. And like I mentioned, Steph is going to be the guy to keep it competitive. But man, there's definitely some downside. And I think there's a lot of merit to fading those guys in GPPs, just because of the ownership. On DraftKings, it's interesting. Steph's fully priced. Wiseman's going to be really popular on FanDuel. I think he fits almost all the optimal builds. So more plays on FanDuel. And certainly I don't mind, going Drew, Wiseman, Greek, and Steph. But man, you look, it's rough because that's a lot of the cash game teams. And if it's a blowout, that's not exactly ideal. So
So,
I'm thinking about it.
Here's the thing. I think Steph and Wiseman are pretty safe because Steph's rotation basically guarantees him 28 to 30 minutes, like
Yeah,
at a
he's gonna play
minimum,
the full
right?
third quarter.
He's going to play the entire first quarter, the entire third quarter, the second half of the second quarter, right? So by the end of the third quarter, he should have 28 to 30 minutes in the bank, right?
Yep.
And then he's going to sit the first part of the fourth quarter, might come in at the very end, right?
And if they're down like 18 on Christmas or 20 even, my guess is like, oh, Kurt throws him out there with like 7 minutes or 8 minutes. And
right.
It's just to see if he can like get hot. Like there's scenarios where they still blow out and Steph gets like 32, 33 minutes just coming in to see if he can shoot him back into the game.
Exactly.
Especially on Christmas, I think.
Exactly. So I think he's pretty safe, his floor, and I don't even have him projected for that many minutes. I have him projected for 31.9, right? And that's pretty conservative, I think. I mean, because he's going to play 34 on any other like regular situation, right? So, and we talked about Wiseman earlier. Like he's blowout proof. He played a ton in blowout time against the Nets. So,
and that's the whole season, by the way. It's now like watch Steph cook and hopefully have a great year and feel good, and just hope that you develop Wiseman into a really good player. And Draymond, we'll see how he looks, and then Klay Thompson. Just come on, Klay, come back healthy. I mean, brutal run out for him, but for this team, like this is a season to invest in Wiseman.
Yeah, I think so two guys that I like in that like 6K range at FanDuel on shooting guard that I think, you can maybe get off Bledsoe, get off Middleton, are Marcus Smart. We can talk about him a little bit. I think his minutes are great. He just had a really low usage in the first game. And I think someone you can dig even deeper in the bag who was arguably the worst player so far is Andrew Wiggins, right?
Oh my God. Andrew Wiggins truther, and boy, was it ugly. I mean, he just had everything go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity is still going to be there. And I think his ownership is just going to be minuscule, just given how bad he looked, right? And that's what I really want to like explore is like we're basically just dealing with a 1-game sample right here, right? People are going to overreact to what they see in that one game. Kevin Durant's the best player in the league or whatever, right? Or
of course,
right?
Recency bias.
Exactly, right? So Andrew Wiggins, worst player in the league. He's not the worst player in the league. He's going to play a lot better than he did that first game. He just looked.
They need him to score,
right?
I don't have faith in Oubre. I mean, Oubre made some cool dunks or whatever. I don't think Oubre is ever going to keep them in a competitive game. We're going to see, a lot of times where, Wiggins isn't the most efficient ever, but like if Wiggins, it helps the team so much if Wiggins can get going, because that will open up the court just a little bit for Steph. If Wiggins doesn't have it going, you can just see the team selling out. So Wiggins, I mean, he can create his own shot anywhere, and he just had a lot of just weird plays where he made some bad spots, like blows by a guy, then like awkwardly runs into someone, doesn't get to the rim. Like there's plenty of scenarios where he's feeling it, his shot's going, and then the game starts to look effortless for him. And that's what they're going to need. They're going to need Steph to play really well, and I think Wiggins is a really good GPP play for sure.
Yeah, and GPPs, if you make the assumption and you're fading the chalky guys, right, like Giannis, assuming a blowout, like you're off Middleton, you're off Drew, all those guys.
And I'm fading the Warriors guys,
right? There isn't really a Warriors guy on that bench you're like, oh, I want to take a shot on, and I think is like the Bobby Portis type version, right? They're so deep, and they can just literally be anybody. They're reaching, like I said, they're reaching for random guys, and it could be Michael Mulder, it could be Juan Toscano Anderson, it could be Jordan Poole. Like you have no idea. Marquise Chris, like
those guys wouldn't even be in my player pool for like 150. I mean, maybe Marquise Chris, I guess, if you want to get really, I would just exclude this person.
And you conversely, the thing is on the Bucks side, assuming a blowout, there isn't really anybody outside of Portis that I really like, because the big factor here is the probable return of DJ Augustine, which really throws a wrench into things. It removes a lot of the value on that Bucks bench, the Bucks depth. It takes away from Pat Connaughton.
Yeah, he was a value before,
right? It takes away from even guys like Bryn Forbes or
even Middleton. Middleton, I would dock him like a minute or so.
And Drew too. Drew takes away from Drew. So I mean, he's kind of just throws a wrench in because they're gonna play him. In in dual guard lineups too. So he's just not playing backup point guard. So you might run like 18 to 20 minutes. So he's going to play a big role. So it's just a tough situation for when this is a blowout. There isn't really anybody that I like. It's just like you're fading the stars kind of thing.
Right. No, I'm with you. I think it's an interesting game for guys, but another game where you get so much optionality. Not having many guys go in these first two games, you get the Milwaukee blowout, all of a sudden you're looking really good. And the game I'm most excited for to watch is this Celtics Nets game. The Nets are just, they're going to be awesome to watch all year. It's so good to see Durant play well. Kyrie, maybe the greatest handle ever, looked unbelievable. I know it's the Warriors defense, which we're bearish on. I think it's going to be really bad throughout the year, but just seeing those guys kind of at, Kyrie at the height of his powers, Durant looked as close as you could look off an Achilles. I mean, he's been healthy for a while now. That Brooklyn team is so deep. LeVert looked great. And, the Celtics are definitely worse, in my opinion, than last year, especially obviously have Kemba out. But man, a lot on Tatum and a lot on Jalen Brown. So it's a good time for those two to show out. And I think the Nets defensively are going to be pretty porous at times. We'll see how this team kind of fits together. Do you have a bet on the Nets? I don't think you have a bet on this game, right? No bet on this game. We'll talk maybe a little player prop stuff. We saw a couple that we were just talking about. But what are your thoughts just on this game before we dive into DFS?
So what I want to look for and what I'm waiting for is Celtics lineup news. How are they going to start this game? Because they threw a wrench in the opener. They started Javonte Green throughout the preseason. He didn't even play in the opener. And they started Tristan Thompson alongside Daniel Theis. How are they going to line up in this game? Are they going to go back to that alignment? Are they going to start Javonte Green? Are they going to start Jeff T? Are they going to start Semi Ojeleye? How are they going to line up? And it kind of affects kind of the value of some of these guys. The best value that's popping in this game is like the big men like Daniel Theis, right? I think his projection, he's only 4.2, great price on him, but there's some fragility there if it ends up being starting at the 4 or Ojeleye starting at the 4, and it ends up being Tristan Thompson and Daniel Theis show at the center, right? There's some downside there. I bumped him down a minute recently just to kind of account for that. So that's what I'm looking for. Just from a news perspective. I mean, I've been banging this drum from the start on the Celtics, how bad their bench is. Like, they don't want to play Peyton Pritchard. They don't want to play Javonte Green. They don't want to play some of these guys. The
only guy I want to see is I think Edwards is interesting, but that's basically it. I mean, I don't know that, and he might not even play. I mean, they're bad. They're just bad.
Yeah. So, I mean, the only guy that really showed out in the opener is Jeff T. I mean, I thought he was dusty and super washed, but he came out and played extremely well in limited minutes. I think he was 4 for 4 from 3, 8 for 12 from the field, shot really well. And he's super cheap on DK at just 4,200 on a slate where we're looking for, good value. Even though I think that first game was an aberration in terms of shooting, in terms of him playing that well. I think his role and his minutes are pretty legit, right? And even if we do see some regression at that price, like, he's still really solid in terms of value.
Yeah. So on DraftKings, I think Teague's by far the best value. He's not as much of a play on FanDuel where he's kind of like fully priced up. The other guy that I really like is Jalen Brown, who continues to get better. And he fits a lot of these balance builds.
Yes.
You mentioned Marcus Smart. I think Marcus Smart is an absolute smash over on FanDuel. So Theis, like you mentioned, rating really well on FanDuel. Jordan's a pivot off Wiseman if you want to go there. I don't think there's a huge ceiling there, so I'm not super interested. But Joe Harris, Marcus Smart, Jalen Brown, Durant, all those guys are nice. Karis LeVert, you could fade maybe the starters and play him and hope that he kind of leads the game into a blowout at the end. So there's a lot of interesting options. But yeah, Marcus Smart in particular, I think makes a ton of sense over on FanDuel, where steals and blocks are worth even more. And if you think about this Brooklyn team, and if you're Boston, how are you going to possibly slow down some of these guys? I mean, Marcus Smart is probably your best answer on Kyrie. Marcus Smart certainly can be a little bit of a nuisance to Durant at times, and you really don't have many guys that are going to set up well to guard Durant. I mean, you don't want Tatum having to take on a huge offensive load and trying to slow him down. I'm sure he'll guard him some. Ojale, I think, is interesting as a starter potentially just to guard Durant, but Smart will certainly be in the mix of guarding Kyrie, Durant, Karis LeVert. He's going to be out there a lot, and all these guys are ISO players and are going to get up a lot of shots. And I think Smart only had like 3 shot attempts or something in the opening game, so there's some upside offensively, and the steals and blocks. I mean, I'm really excited about that, and it's supposed to be a close game, so I expect heavy minutes from Smart, Jalen Brown, and Jason Tatum. And I think it's a really good game to stack too, because especially on FanDuel, Kyrie Irving is going to be way lower owned than Steph Curry, and he's only 200 more. And yeah, we project Kyrie a little bit lower than Steph, but you talk about their ceilings. I mean, they both have really high ceilings, but there's way more blowout risk to Steph, and I think you get Kyrie at significantly lower ownership. So he's someone I'm targeting. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I love that call. What do you think about KD? So KD at a position where a lot of attention is going to be on Giannis, AD, and Milsap, I think.
On FanDuel, Durant is nice, 8,500.
Yes, right? That is a really nice price. I know there's kind of a lower ceiling that we need to get used to, because he talked about how he probably needed like 2 months to get into full shape, and he's still like in the 90s in terms of where he's feeling at percentage wise, even though he's looked great. So we're not going to see like 34, 35 minutes from KD, which is something
that's why we have him projected for 32, which is not, these other stars are going to get 3 or 4 minutes and then their projection.
And then you also have to like compare that versus Giannis's like median projection, right, for minutes in this spot with the 10-point spread. It's like 32, right? So I think I think their minutes projection.
He can get there on efficiency though. Durant was still getting blocks. Like he can get there on 32 minutes. The question is, you play Durant and Kyrie together? I probably wouldn't, unless you're doing like a full-blown game stack, which is interesting on Christmas with only 5 games and potential blowout with Milwaukee. And, one of these close spreads could certainly be a blowout too. So you pick up some equity in those scenarios. But yeah, Durant and Kyrie, I think, are both really interesting. And then Karis LeVert specifically on FanDuel, I think if you fade this game, he's an interesting, like, kind of one-off piece that you can play. And all the Boston guys, I mean, Tatum's expensive, but super high ceiling, and Jalen Brown makes a lot of sense to me.
I love Jalen Brown. I love Jalen Brown.
Yeah, he looks so good. I just think he's like, with Kemba out, they're just going to need a lot of creation out of him. And I imagine that they're going to end up staggering Tatum and Brown. They want one of those guys on the court at all times when Kemba's out. So that there's upside there for sure. All right, let's move on to the Mavericks at the Lakers. You can see here a lot of 6.5s. There's some 6.5, 5. There's more divergence in price on this game, which is interesting. Luka, I mean, I think he compares in a lot of ways to LeBron, just in terms of the way he is so elite on offense. Obviously different in terms of style of play. He's going to shoot more, not as explosive as LeBron, who's the GOAT athletically, but same usage, and they both share the magic power of being one of the best passers in the league. I'm a huge LeBron truther. I think his passing is still wildly underrated. He's much more Magic Johnson than Michael Jordan. And, we already have highlight clips. That pass that Luka threw around Aiden's back was just outrageous, and obviously has huge upside in the threes. From a betting perspective, I don't. Do you have one on this game? No, you have the under or over on the Clippers Nuggets. So no bet here currently. Anthony Davis probable. You're super excited to talk about Anthony Davis. What's the line that we get Anthony Davis to the locker room on Christmas?
I think this is going to be a dominant performance from Anthony Davis. Honestly, you look at this front court. No Kristaps Porzingis. Dwight Powell looks like a guy coming off a ruptured Achilles. Yep. They're going to throw some Maxi Kleber in there, some Willie Cauley-Stein. This is a matchup that AD should eat in. I'm interested in taking a stab at his over and his rebound prop. I think it's 9.5 right now. We have it rated like a 7 with the 10.5 projection. I really like AD in the spot, and Let's talk about.
We have under on LeBron because I think that's important. I'm bearish on
Yeah.
LeBron.
I mean, Vogel came out and said afterwards that this whole minute managing thing is going to continue for at least during this first stretch of games so they can get through it. So fully expecting him to be in that, 28, 30-minute range. And I would be very surprised if Vogel was reckless and decided, oh, this is a close game. I'm going to pay LeBron 35, 36 minutes, like Budenholzer did, or like Spo did with Butler. I think he's going to be very disciplined in terms of how he's going to manage LeBron. Keep the eye on the prize. They just need to make it to the postseason healthy, and they have the depth on this team to be competitive even when LeBron's off the floor. So I think LeBron's minute range is pretty tight, and I mean he's not even a guy that I would really look at in tournaments just because he just has to be so efficient in his minutes to really get there and compete with some of these other guys.
Yeah, I mean, I want Luka in the same game for more. I like Anthony Davis, and I'm paying up on the Lakers. And I'm actually interested in, Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, I think is interesting for tournaments on the Lakers side. But specifically on DraftKings, we're looking at the Dallas side exclusively. Maxi Kleber is looking like one of the top values just because we need the savings. There's not that many great values. And, you mentioned it, Dwight Powell not looking good, no Kristaps Porzingis. Kleber really spaces the floor nicely, can get a hot from three, can get some block shots and rebounds.
Super cheap on DK.
So cheap on DK. He's one of the top values. I expect him to be owned quite a bit, but there's just not that many good salary relief options. Dorian Finney-Smith, we'll look at him on FanDuel. I want to get your Luka take. And of course, Josh Richardson, I think is one of the best tournament plays on both sites. I think there's some real upside to Josh Richardson this season. He's going to play a lot of minutes, and he shoots well. Playing off Luka is an amazing thing for him. Luka takes up so much attention. Richardson's going to get open shots, and I just think it's especially with KP out, they need scoring outside of Luka, and I think Richardson will get a nice little bump there. So he's rating well. He's specifically nice over on FanDuel. You can see Harrell, I think, is a really good tournament play. Especially if Wiseman catches a lot more ownership. Finney-Smith's a really nice punt at small forward. Richardson's rating well, where steals are bumped, and then Schroeder, who I mentioned. So a lot to unpack there. Let's start with Luka and then get to the secondary pieces. How does Luka rank for you as a star on this slate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm in GPPs. I'm looking to get off Giannis and spend elsewhere. I'm looking at a Luka spend at point guard. I'm looking at a Jokic spend at center.
Oh baby. Baby.
I mean, I think there's some other opportunities to get off Giannis and that blowout risk, which I'm really concerned about. So I think Luka's great in GPPs. Josh Richardson, another guy, kind of falls in that Marcus Smart bucket where I think they're going to be under-owned. People are going to be clicking on Eric Bledsoe, Middleton, some of these other type of guys. And instead, Schroeder, you mentioned, looked really great with Montrezl Harrell in that pick and roll. They look like they've been playing forever with each other. Just a great fit, great chemistry. Montrezl Harrell, you mentioned popping. Curious about his minutes. So Marcus Gasol got in foul trouble in the opener. I think Montrezl got up to like 30 in terms of minutes. I docked him to 27. So curious to see what kind of bounce back game Marcus Gasol has, or if he's just kind of, dusty, period. And they just have to play Montrezl like a ton. So curious. There's some minutes volatility with him, though I think he's a really strong play, really strong value. Who else? Anybody else on in this?
Kleber, I think, is a clear. I think he's going to be owned on DraftKings. What do you do with Kleber as a cop?
He's a cash game play only. Yeah. Right. In GPPs, I think you opt for a balanced build. So you don't have to pay stars and scrubs and have to play someone like Maxi Kleber or who are some of the other.
Oh, you when you start going into drafts, that's the problem. When you start doing it, I mean, Paul Millsap we'll talk about in a second. Jeff Teague's 4,200, but there's no real punts. Like you look through our stuff here, like the other punt that was looking like maybe a play was Pat Connaughton. I guess you could play Bradley Wanamaker. That's not a play I would make, but like you look through all the top rated guys in the fantasy labs models, there's just not cheap guys that are popping. I mean, you definitely have some of these like 4 to 5K guys that you can certainly build around. There's a lot of guys that I don't mind at that price target, but it's really hard to go stars and scrubs. So that's why I think Kleba is going to get elevated in ownership. Obviously, it's a good value, but he does open up a lot, and there's a lot of places to spend money. So I expect him to be pretty chalky in DraftKings.
Yeah, definitely. And that's when you're seeing Maxi Kleba chalk, you know you got to get away.
Maxi Kleba and Eric Bledsoe chalk. What could go wrong?
Right, exactly. So those are perfect situations to build a more balanced roster. Emphasize guys like in the 8K range, 7K range, like Jalen Brown, like we mentioned, and just kind of try to hit doubles and triples instead of like the homer with a Giannis, and you just get a more balanced build. So anybody else from that game that really is popping off to you from either side?
Yeah, we talked about Luka and Richardson. I like AD, Schroeder. I do think Gasol will play better at times. It needs to be matchup specific. His passing is going to be really valuable, but yeah, he's just getting old. And, that's a guy they want to play 10, 15 minutes. Marc Gasol would be like the perfect guy to play a decent amount versus like the Nuggets with Jokic. Right. And obviously the best teams in the Lakers, when we get into the playoffs and stuff, like the AD at the 5 is going to be, where this team, especially with the addition of Schroeder and the wing play that they're getting, I think a lot of their best teams are going to be, LeBron and AD as the 2 front court players. But yeah, Tim Hardaway Jr. you could take a shot at, but that's probably not what I'm going to do. I think it's mostly the stars, with Josh Richardson being kind of my favorite GPP play. I think the comparison to Smart is right on point.
I think there's a decent price tag on DFS at 4,200, but if I'm looking to save at small forward and punt, I'm probably going to take the $700 and go down to Batum instead, I would think. So DFS kind of like a boring play, decent value, kind of always pops, because he's going to play like 32, 33 minutes and he's cheap. But one I'm probably not going to if I'm building.
Yep. All right, last game of the slate, which I'm super stoked about too from a DFS perspective. And obviously a big Nuggets fan too. Clippers with the Nuggets here. We're looking at 2.5 point spread. You're already on the over under. 224.5 is kind of where it's coming up to. There's some 225.5s out there now. You can see here on Insiders, you bet over 224. I think that's sharp. I think the Nuggets are going to be awesome on offense, one of the best offenses in the league. Not so good defensively, and I think the Clippers still have a ton of guys. I mean, we'll talk about Paul George, who's probably the best. He's the chalk that I think is by far the best on the slate. They still have Lou Williams, Kawhi look good, but they're not great at times. I don't think this Clippers team is going to be motivated to like play elite level defense this early in the season. So I like that over a lot, and I think this is a great game environment for DFS. So talk about this bet first.
This is the true late night hammer. And this is one I think might get underexposed because a lot of the chalk are in some of these other spots like New Orleans, Milwaukee. I love this game. And we talked about the Pelicans and the Heat, the total going the other way, going down. This total has been shooting up like significantly in the buildup. I mean, I think it opened at 222. I've seen some 226s out there too. So this is going to continue to climb. Mike Malone has talked about he wants this team to score 130 points. And we got the news JaMychal Green is out again, which means Michael Porter Jr., the power forward, PJ Dozier in smaller lineups, like they're going to have to lean small, and MPJ is going to play a ton of minutes again. And we know how, bad he is defensively. And, the trade-off you have from MPJ at the 4 to JaMychal Green is significant. So, I love this game. There's a lot of good pieces here to like. Jokic, I mentioned, people are going to go a different direction at center. James Wiseman, Montrezl Harrell, some other names. Jokic is going to get overlooked, and his minutes floor is very high. Like no Mason Plumlee. They don't want to play Isaiah Hardenstein that much. Like their front court depth without JaMychal Green is super suspect. So Jokic, a very good bet for 34 to 36 minutes. And we saw him just murder Zubac in the playoffs last year. I mean, this matchup does not scare me at all for Jokic. I mean, he's proven he can He can dominate against Zubac. I'm not really scared about the Serge Ibaka matchup at all. So I love Jokic kind of as a pivot off of a guy like Giannis, for example, just the alternative spend different type of roster.
Just a monster triple double versus the Kings too. Very not a dark horse MVP, a legitimate MVP candidate. I think he's going to put up gargantuan numbers. Jokic is a joy to watch, and this offense is going to be absolutely outrageous, especially if Porter continues to move in the right direction. Really disappointing opening game from Jamal Murray. He is probable. Would really like to see him kind of show what he showed in the playoffs at times throughout the regular seasons and just be a little more consistent of a star that he is in the regular season. We've seen that now for a couple of years where he just really elevates his game in the playoffs, but even more upside, in his great nights with all that scoring. Paul Millsap is basically kind of the top value play in this game on both sides. He's in all the optimals, and that's just because we're projecting him to play a good amount of minutes because JaMychal Green's out, and I don't really know what else the Nuggets are going to do. Those small lineups are tricky. Yeah.
Millsap is a guy we don't ever feel comfortable playing. But let me say this: if there's a time to play Paul Millsap, it's early in the season when he's less dusty, right? The older guys, you want to play earlier in the season. And to his credit, he looked great in the preseason too. So this isn't like a surprise where he has been.
And he's a really good player.
Yeah.
And he's not the player he was in his prime, but he does a lot of things well. And from a DFS perspective, you can count on him to fill up a lot of different stats. I mean, he's lost his athleticism, but he can he can get steals, he can get blocks, he gets rebounds, he can score. I mean, he can fill up the whole stat sheet.
It's like the Larry Fitzgerald thing, right? You want to play him in the season.
It's very good comp. Paul Millsap and Larry Fitzgerald, very good comp.
I don't love Paul Millsap in a vacuum of 4,900 for a really high floor for minutes without JaMychal Green. I'll take that all day. MPJ, another guy that has a really elevated minutes floor. Who does have
Let's look at FanDuel because Draftkings, Millsap stands out, and then all these guys are interesting. More tournament plays. They're not going to be in a lot of the optimals like Paul George, but FanDuel, we're looking at tons of elite value. Porter is basically a lock. Millsap is really close. In tournaments, you could say, I think Porter's a tough fade in any format, but Millsap, maybe you can make an argument. Batum and Price, I think that was an underrated addition to this Clippers team, especially if he's going to play decently. I think, Batum, we're not that far away from when he was really good. And in Charlotte, they went to the youth movement. His length just kind of complements the length that they already have at the wings, and his shot looked buttery. So we'll see. I know Batum's been dusty, but I think there's some underrated upside. Paul George is popping. I think Zubac plays more. Do you think there's any chance he starts? I mean, I know they want to play Serge as a starter for the season, but if there's a time to start,
I think it's possible that they go matchup in this one, especially with given how much Zubac played last game. It shows the willingness to kind of extend him. So wouldn't surprise me if they make the adjustment. So I want to talk a little bit about MPJ first, and we can move on to some other guys. So MPJ, in his projection, obviously his floor is increased just given how bad the depth is in the front court. Then how much he has to play at power forward. He has a range though. I don't want to be like MPJ. Let's go all in on MPJ. We've seen him have really good games and really bad games too. So do you trust him enough as a guy in cash? I think.
Oh yeah.
5,400.
FanDuel, he's gonna play enough minutes. I think they're committed to him as an organization. Without JaMychal Green, there's just not that many other lineups they're going to go to. Even if he starts off badly in this game, I just think they're going to play him, and Porter's going to get it.
Right.
He's going to get his shots up. So it's just I just don't see that many paths to real bad failure. Obviously, he can be inefficient, but
if you're building 150 on FanDuel, how give your exposure percent?
I'd probably max him at 70 or 80% just because you can get some leverage off it. But I do think he's the best small forward play.
Right.
Well, we'll look at all the positions just real quickly here at the end. But I mean, Porter's. If I'm playing 2 or 3 lineups on FanDuel, it's hard for me to envision not having all 3.
Yeah. Another guy I want to mention too that's going to be really underowned, and he did not look good in the opener, is Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah.
So Paul George, it looks like it's his team to start in terms of him being the guy, quote unquote, and maybe Kawhi is just ramping things up slowly and trying to peak for the playoffs. And PG's coming out gunning. But I think Kawhi is going to be a guy that's really underowned on the slate that, obviously not too far removed from being arguably the best player in the league. So that he's kind of really interesting to me on both sides. Do you have kind of any insight on Kawhi? Do you think?
I think Kawhi's an elite GPP play, but I'm all in on Paul George. I mean, I know it's narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, he got so much crap this offseason, and rightfully so. I hate that he blamed Doc at all. Like, he's got to own that. He's a superstar. He gets paid like a superstar. I'm the biggest Paul George fan. I think he's got one of the smoothest games. Like, he is so efficient with his movements. He looks, when he's on, it just looks so effortless. And I'm just a huge fan of his overall game. And I was stoked to just see him come out balling. And I think the best thing about Paul George on this slate and going forward is that, Tyloo talked about staggering Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and specifically giving Paul George the keys to the secondary unit, which I think is a total smash given kind of how it sets up, especially with Harold gone. I mean, obviously Lou Williams is still going to get buckets, but like we saw Paul George just cooking in that second unit. So I think he's a lock for me on FanDuel. I really like lineups with Paul George and Michael Porter. Even Milsap, I'm really comfortable with those teams. But I don't think a lot of people are going to run it back with Kawhi. And I definitely love game stacks. And like you can make amazing teams with like 4, 5, 6 guys from this game. And you keep a lot of flexibility too. And like if Zubac gets moved to like starter, then you can start moving around on some other things. So I think there's a lot of value in having optionality. Gary Harris is another guy that I think is a key piece for this Nuggets team this year. He can shoot threes again. He's going to be really, really important. So I like Gary Harris. Maybe not a ton of DFS, but he's at least interesting as a savings and maybe a game stack. And then Will Barton's the last guy we haven't talked about. He's maybe more of a one-off piece for me, but he's certainly interesting. Will Barton's going to play. They're going to play some of these small ball lineups.
Yeah. So we've touched on this a couple of times, but the flexibility with the late swap is one of the, if not the biggest asset in terms of DFS GPP edges. And to be able to not only have the flexibility in general, but have the flexibility to swap onto this late night hammer of a game with so many juicy options and in such a great game environment is just incredible. Like I would, in general, if you're building GPP teams, go wider on some of these early games and have the flexibility to swap on and get exposure.
Let me show something off that I think is really cool, the optimizer. If I was building 150, let's say on FanDuel, so the first thing I would do is load up this game. And one of the cool things you can do to bump ownership if you're using the optimizer is these flames. So like Porter's already going to be in there. So maybe I'll only do him once, but like I love Paul George. Let's go get him up there. We'll get Batum up there. Let's bump up Zubac in the event that he plays. Let's really bump up Jokic. I'm going to stay off Barton and actually just get him out of there, given I'm getting so heavy on all these other guys. We'll get Gary Harris. We'll really bump up Kawhi, maybe some Beverly. So we have the starters. We even give a little love to Jamal Murray and Serge Ibaka. And so now we have, emphasis on these late guys. We go in and select all the guys. And there's a ton of things that you can do. Drew Dinkmeyer has done a lot of really good videos. We're going to have more and more content around all the stuff that you can do with the settings. But, let's say we're making 50 lineups here. Like, it's pretty cool, making these teams, especially if you're going to go heavy with these guys. You'll see that the ownership shakes out really nicely towards a lot of the guys. And this gives you a lot of flexibility throughout the day. We mentioned fading Giannis. He's probably not even in this mix, given how much we like some of these expensive guys in the late games.
Like
so
PG and Jokic, you're not.
Yeah, and even like Luka's pretty low at 4%. So you're getting a lot. And obviously, you can start messing with these. You could set max. Like let's say we did the same settings that we had before, but we're gonna max exposure on a player. We'll set it at 80. So we apply those settings. We'll clear it. We'll do the same thing. This will be a little bit different, but this is how I would be thinking about some of these, projections here. And maybe this is not going to work with 80, but in theory, there we go. There it is, setting at 80. So 80 max on these guys. And, now you're getting some different builds. But that's one way you can kind of take advantage of late swap within our optimizer is by liking some of the later guys that you think are really good values. And these teams are all still projecting really close to the optimals, and you're getting leverage versus the field as well as the optionality. So one thing I love to do within the optimizer, and we'll have more content on how to leverage that if you're mass multi-entering in the NBA. Let's finish up here with DFS, just kind of looking through some of the positions. We hit on a lot of these guys throughout the show. Are there some key plays that you're thinking about? You can do either side. I can toggle between FanDuel and DraftKings that you love. I mean, obviously you can come to the Fantasy Labs Miles and see what Justin thinks from a projecting standpoint. He's updating all the individual stats. The minutes projections are a huge part of this. So you can see the top values, but maybe some of the leverage plays that, might not be the top values, but still good values that you think have some additional upside. You're on mute, Justin.
Yeah, I think the two positions that I really like to differentiate that I'm seeing are shooting guard and center in GPP. Shooting guard with Paul George, Josh Richardson, Marcus Smart, maybe some Wiggins, Schroeder, and then going to center, looking at like Jokic and Adebayo.
Oh yeah.
So
I love Jokic.
I think those are the two positions that I'm really looking at. Otherwise, it's like fairly chalky. Like you have the chalk at power forward, you have to eat with Paul Millsap. You have the chalk at small forward, you have to eat with Michael Porter Jr. Because those guys are like too cheap given their minutes projections and their roles. And then like I don't know, you can't really like get too crazy at point guard.
Yeah, point guard, I think you Steph and Drew together makes a lot of sense. And if you're going to play the blowout, I still think Steph is pretty safe, but like you mentioned, but then you can get into some of these other guys. I think Kyrie is a fantastic pivot. I talked about him. I think Lonzo Ball has more upside because he also got in foul trouble. And then of course I'm high on Luka. But yeah, I really, really like this Clippers game at the end. So, you can build a different team with a little bit of savings at point guard potentially. Because I think most builds are going to be a combination of like Steph, Drew, maybe Luka gets up there. So you'll have some different builds if you go away from those guys. And Dragic certainly would elevate as a play if Jimmy Butler was out.
Right. Anything on DK specifically that you have takes on?
Yeah, I have quite a few takes on DK. I think I'm going to probably fade Middleton. I'm going to get away from that game in particular. I think I'm more excited to play some of these Drew, Curry, and maybe some other combos of that game on FanDuel. And I want to be underweight the field on that game. So on DraftKings, I'm going to completely fade it, which means, I'm going to get more Jalen Brown. I love Jeff Teague. I really like this Boston-Brooklyn game on DraftKings specifically. And I think the one interesting thing is kind of how can you differentiate with some of these balanced builds? Because a lot of these guys are going to end up being chalky. And if you can figure out a smart way to build a little different balanced team that still has a lot of upside, I think that's a really good way to go. And, Nikola Jokic is someone who I think maybe as your top spend makes a ton of sense, given the triple-double upside and everything else. I do think that there's a couple other guys that we didn't talk too much about at FanDuel, like a Duncan Robinson maybe is specifically a DraftKings play with 3.5 points for the three-pointers. So yeah, DraftKings is definitely a tighter build and a little trickier, but it's certainly a fun slate.
Yeah, maybe a JJ Redick type on DK with a 3-point bonus.
Yep. He's very similar to Duncan Robinson.
I think they've been playing like a really tight rotation. The Pelicans have with like JJ Redick and Josh Hart, and then a little Melly, a little Jackson Hayes behind them. They're playing those Redick and Hart's like 25 to 28. So I could see him being a sprinkle too. Redick and Duncan Robinson both the same price at 4,400 on DK with the 3-point bonus.
Yep. It's going to be a great slate, man. And just for everyone watching out there, we're obviously rooting for all our subscribers in all formats. We're running some really good promotions right now too for Action Labs. So if you're seeing this, you're watching this video for free. You've seen all these amazing tools that we've built that we're all really proud of. And Justin and the team are grinding super hard to keep all this stuff up to date. We update the projections in real time throughout the night. So you are going to get good information here within Action Labs and Fantasy Labs. So super stoked about the slate. Merry Christmas to everyone. Justin, any final words?
No, man, just really excited about the slate and excited about what we're building. I think the goal has always been to get away from like picks and betting picks and DFS picks and kind of focus more on creating a product that mimics our process, right? And over in Action Labs is basically just putting out from start to finish what all the injuries, the bets I'm watching, the bets I'm like the rationale behind what goes behind the decision, what goes into the final product. So just continue to be excited about what we're building, and yeah, super pumped for this this Christmas slate, man.
Yeah, well, good luck to you, Justin. Hopefully, one of our subscribers ships a lot of money. I'm excited to grind the slate for cash and tournaments, and yeah, a lot of opportunity. I think there's going to be even more opportunity in the betting markets. Once we get into the full grind of the season, there's not a ton of news tomorrow, but there's still some things. And of course, follow at Fantasy Labs NBA, subscribe to Action Labs Fantasy Labs, and you will be covered for all things NBA. Good luck to you guys. Merry Christmas.
Good luck, guys.